Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at the Musée des Armes, the Arms Museum in Liège, part of the larger Liège City Museum complex. And we are taking a look at the very first French patented semi-automatic firearm. This is a Clair brothers shotgun. Now, they made their first patent, they got their first patent in 1888, and that first patent was actually for a mechanism that would convert a bolt-action rifle to semi-auto. We've seen that story happen a lot before. They didn't actually manage to put that into production, however. They would file a couple more patents improving on the basic concept. This was a gas piston concept. A gas piston concept pretty similar to the one patented by Maxim in 1884, but apparently sufficiently different that the French government was willing to issue a patent specifically to them. So they would file a couple of additional improved patents in 1889, 1891, and 1892. And in 1893, they started production on commercial firearms. So they made shotguns like this one. They also made pistols, semi-automatic pistols, and they would go on to do some military weapons as well. We'll talk about the military weapons in a minute, but first, let me show you a few of the features of this. Unfortunately, this particular example has some internal issues, so I'm kind of limited in how much I can show you. But it looks really nice on the outside. So let's start with some markings. They certainly did come up with a really cool logo, complete with a whole bunch of little lightning bolts there. And you'll notice this is marked fermé, which means closed, to indicate how far forward the bolt has to be actually be closed and locked. And that's significant because the bolt closes most of the way with very little force and then takes a lot more to actually lock up. We have a manual safety in front of the trigger, so safe and fire. And a Damascus barrel on a semi-auto shotgun. That's a bit unusual, although it's unusual because a semi-auto shotgun in 1893 is by itself quite unusual. There is one other marking on the gun, and that's on the top of the receiver. Clair Frères, which means Clair Brothers. Brevet, patented, SGDG, which is that abbreviation that basically means the government guarantees that it's patented but doesn't guarantee that it will actually work. And then Saint Etienne, which is the city where the brothers were living and where they manufactured this. Now, when I tell you that a gun is a semi-automatic repeating shotgun and you see this, one would naturally assume that this is the tube magazine. In this case, however, this is the gas piston tube. If we look at the underside of the action, where you would expect to load, that's all solid, and that's because you actually load the gun backwards. That is the front of a wooden follower plug, and what you would do is put shells in here and push them back into a tubular magazine that holds 5 rounds and goes down into the stock. So this is a top ejecting design, and unfortunately the recoil spring, I believe, is either missing or broken. The bolt is all the way forward at this point. Note that we are, oh boy, about an inch shy of fermé, closed, and it has a vertically traveling locking block in there that locks on that last bit of travel. That leaves this little block back here. That's our striker because this is striker fired. So when I fire, that striker block drops. That's what would actually fire a shell. Because the recoil spring is not functional, I can lock this open and show you that little guy, which is the magazine follower, wooden in this case, and it is in the elevator. You can see a pair of curved lips right there that would normally lift a shell up to the level of the chamber for feeding. Because the gun is empty, and unfortunately that follower is, oh, there we go. Yeah, I can get it a little ways back, but it's jamming in there and I don't want to force it any farther. At any rate, you can see how it's sitting in an elevator, and normally what would happen is when the bolt reached full rearward travel, that elevator would lift. You can see it just starting to lift as I pull the bolt handle back. Right there. So that would lift a shell up along this track, and then the bolt would push it forward into the chamber. Unfortunately, I don't have a way to take apart the gas system to show you the internals. The spring is actually back here in the front end of the gas piston. That was Not great for it, although in a sporting shotgun that wouldn't have been a significant flaw. It would be a flaw in a military application of the design. You can see that there's an empty hole. This was just a sling swivel that is missing from the front. In 1898, the Clair brothers submitted a semi-automatic military carbine to the French government at Camp des Chalons, where it was tested. They had chambered this in the 7mm Mauser cartridge, 7x57, and it was an elegant looking rifle. You know, there are some early semi-auto rifles that you can just tell from looking at them are not going to work. The Clair brothers carbine was actually pretty decent. Ultimately, however, it was deemed too complicated. There were some feed issues with it. They thought it was too heavy, which I think is one of those judgments that's a little naive at the time. The semi-auto rifles that would end up being adopted, 20 years later were heavier, equal to or heavier than guns like these. So ultimately, it was rejected by the military in the 1890s. But this is not the only semi-automatic mechanism that the French military was investigating. They would go on to continue developing a huge variety of very interesting semi-automatic rifles, mostly within the secret confines of the various French arsenal system. So we would see that ultimately come to fruition in the RSC rifles in World War I. But I'm diverging a bit here. Today, looking at the Clair carbine, I've wanted to see one of these for a while, sorry, the Clair shotgun, because this is one of the very first French semi-automatic mechanisms ever patented. So it's very cool that the Liège Museum gave me the opportunity to pull this out from the display and show it to you guys during normal operation, which they're just in the process of finishing up. They're finishing building the displays here in Liège, and this is part of their display in the civilian sporting firearms room, where they have a whole bunch of really interesting technological breakthrough designs, early mechanical systems like this one. It's a fantastic museum. If you're in Liège, you should definitely stop by and take a look. If you're not in Liège, then you'll have to suffice with just watching the video, which hopefully you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.